We are commencing legal action against Mrs. Meghan Markle. Her televised allegations, particularly the Oprah interview, have inflicted undue harm upon the royal family. An apology no longer suffices. The matter will now proceed through the...
What if the royal door Meghan believed was still slightly open had actually been locked years ago, and the final request she sent to King Charles wasn't a negotiation at all, but the last test of a decision that had already been made behind palace walls? According to the explosive claims surrounding this story, everything changed just minutes before the palace allegedly confirmed what many royal watchers feared was coming: a final request, a final review, and then a final rejection. Not a delay, not a discussion, not a compromise, a full stop. And the most shocking part? Insiders allegedly suggest that by the time Meghan's appeal reached Charles's desk, the outcome may have already been waiting inside a sealed file. Imagine the atmosphere. Buckingham Palace, closed doors, senior aides moving carefully through silent corridors, and at the center of it all, King Charles sitting alone with a document that reportedly carried years of tension, years of headlines, years of family conflict compressed into a few pages. Meghan's alleged request wasn't just about security. It wasn't just about recognition. It was about whether there was still any pathway back into the royal system she once occupied. And according to this narrative, Charles looked at every line, every argument, every appeal, and then quietly placed the document down as if its fate had already been decided. That phrase alone sent shockwaves through royal gossip circles. Reconciliation access, not public reconciliation, private reconciliation. The inner circle, the very heart of the institution. The place where power, loyalty, and trust intersect. But if whispers from palace insiders are to be believed, that trust may have become the one thing no formal request could restore. No further appeals, no further discussions. Listen carefully to those words, because they sound less like a temporary decision and more like the closing scene of a very long chapter. And that's where the mystery deepens, because some insiders reportedly claim the rejection wasn't created because Meghan made the request. They suggest the framework for rejection had already existed long before her latest appeal arrived. If that's true, then this wasn't a response. It was confirmation. Confirmation that a line had already been drawn somewhere inside palace strategy meetings years earlier. The silence becomes suspicious when you start connecting the dots. Why were senior advisors allegedly so calm? Why was there reportedly no frantic debate? Why did the atmosphere feel less like a crisis and more like the execution of an already accepted outcome? Sometimes the biggest clue isn't what people say, it's what they don't say. Think about that image for a moment. A request carrying enormous emotional weight, years of controversy, years of accusations, years of family fractures. Yet according to accounts, the document was treated almost like history instead of possibility. That's what made observers wonder whether the decision had already become institutional rather than personal. And while Charles reportedly sat with that file, another important figure was allegedly receiving his own briefing elsewhere inside the palace. William, the future king, the man who, according to endless royal speculation, has increasingly become the guardian of continuity inside the monarchy. And here's where things become even more fascinating. Reports suggest William didn't argue, didn't demand revisions, didn't push for a different outcome. Instead, he reportedly accepted the summary almost immediately. That reaction fueled an entirely new theory among royal observers that this wasn't Charles's decision alone. It was a decision that reflected the future direction of the institution itself. Because for years, rumors have circulated about a growing palace belief that partial returns create bigger problems than complete separations. Half-in, half-out arrangements, limited duties, selective privileges. Every version supposedly raised the same concern: confusion. And confusion is something monarchies historically fear more than controversy. That tiny detail may be the most symbolic moment in the entire story. A reconciliation folder. Removed, archived, not updated, not revised, archived, almost like someone quietly packing away a future that no longer existed. The image is powerful because it transforms an administrative act into something deeply emotional. One folder disappears into storage, and suddenly it feels as though years of possibility disappear with it. That's why palace staff reportedly felt the atmosphere changing around them. Not because people were shouting, because nobody was. And when silence spreads through an institution built on protocol, experienced insiders know something significant is happening. Then came became the alleged Windsor meeting one of the most talked about moments in this entire narrative. A narrow path, just enough room for hope, just enough room to believe the story wasn't over. But according to reports, the room she entered may have already been operating under entirely different assumptions. And that is where the real mystery begins. Because if the conversation felt unnecessary before it even started, what had already happened behind palace walls? What makes this alleged royal saga so captivating is that the deeper you look, the less it appears to be about a single request, and the more it starts looking like the final chapter of a story that may have been heading toward this outcome for years. According to reports and palace speculation, the Windsor meeting became the moment many insiders privately pointed to as the true turning point, not because there was a dramatic confrontation, not because voices were raised, but because sometimes the most devastating decisions arrive wrapped in calm silence, and that silence reportedly lingered long after Meghan left the room. 2 words, no reversal. Those words became the centerpiece of endless speculation, because what exactly did they mean? Were they simply administrative instructions? Or were they evidence that the palace had finally reached a point where reconciliation was no longer being evaluated as a possibility? Royal watchers immediately seized upon the phrase, arguing that it sounded less like a temporary position and more like a permanent direction. Suddenly, every previous disagreement, every public controversy, every strained relationship seemed to point toward this exact moment. That image says everything. Untouched teacups, an unfinished meeting, conversations that ended without resolution. It feels almost cinematic, yet according to the narrative, those cold teacups became symbolic of something larger. Hope cooling, possibilities fading, a future quietly slipping away while everyone in the room understood that no amount of additional discussion would change where events were heading. Then came the final appeal, the last attempt, the document that reportedly arrived carrying requests for restored security coordination, renewed recognition, and private reconciliation access. On paper, it may have looked like another proposal, but inside palace circles, many allegedly viewed it differently. They viewed it as the final confirmation of a debate that had already reached its conclusion. And there it is, the sentence that transformed this entire story from a family dispute into a royal mystery. Already understood. If that's true, then the real story wasn't the appeal itself. The real story was what happened beforehand. What conversations took place in private offices? What concerns kept resurfacing during internal discussions? What conclusions were quietly forming while the public remained focused on headlines and speculation? The alleged answer is simple but powerful. Palace advisors reportedly became increasingly convinced that any partial return would create confusion about roles, responsibilities, and the future direction of the monarchy. In their view, clarity mattered more than compromise. Stability mattered more than sentiment. And once that belief took hold, every road appeared to lead toward the same destination. That's the moment, the signature. Not dramatic, not explosive, just final. The kind of moment that changes everything precisely because it happened so quietly. According to reports, aides immediately sensed that something irreversible had occurred. There was no celebration, no visible triumph, no emotional release, just the realization that a chapter many thought might someday reopen had instead been sealed shut. And once the decision moved through official channels, the outside world exploded. Within hours, the story reportedly escaped palace walls and became global conversation. Headlines appeared. Commentators rushed to interpret the meaning. Supporters and critics lined up on opposite sides. Some viewed the decision as necessary institutional protection. Others saw it as heartbreaking confirmation that reconciliation had failed. But regardless of perspective, one thing became impossible to ignore. The palace had delivered clarity. No way back, 5 words. Yet those 5 words perfectly captured the emotional force behind the story. Because at its heart, this was never just about status, security, or protocol. It was about whether relationships damaged by years of controversy could ever return to where they once were. And according to this narrative, the answer had finally arrived. That may be the most haunting line of all. Not anger, not revenge, not punishment, permanence. And perhaps that's why the story continues to fascinate people around the world. Not because of what was said publicly, but because of everything that allegedly happened behind closed doors. The silent meetings, the archived folders, the missing conversations, the unexplained pauses, the unanswered questions. Each detail fills feels like a clue in a larger puzzle that may never be fully revealed. Yet even after the signatures, the headlines, and the declarations of finality, one mystery still lingers over Buckingham Palace. Was this truly the end of the story? Or will future events expose details that completely change how this moment is remembered? Because in royal history, the most explosive revelations often emerge long after everyone believes the chapter has already closed. And that possibility alone is enough to keep the whispers alive, the speculation growing, and the mystery unfolding far beyond the palace gates.